Welcome back and thank you for staying with All Angles. Now let's remind you of this non-profit organization, My Vote Counts, has filed court papers challenging the Political Party Funding Act. The organization is calling for the scrapping of the 100,000 rand limit before parties need to disclose their funding. It's also calling for a decrease of the 15 million rand donation threshold be reduced. To unpick this further, let's speak to political analyst Lukhona Vangqa. Lukhona, thank you very much for your time. Of course, My Vote Counts feeling as though this is not fair, even if a donor only gives a political party 2,000 rand, that donor should be let known. Do you agree?
Maseko, it's a bit of a complex issue, and you must think of what thresholds are trying to balance and what My Vote Counts is calling for. So if you might remember, in one of the recent IEC's reports on the Political Party Funding Act, in terms of disclosures by parties, there was a disclaimer made in one of the reports that said, in actual fact, the African National Congress, the ANC, accumulated 10 million rands from donations that are below the threshold of 100,000. So they may have had multiple 90,000 rands or 99,000 rands deposits that accumulate to 10 million rands. Now, you'd need at least 100 of those types of deposits. The problem when you don't have sight of those deposits and who the depositors are is that you are then unable to check whether or not there's an under-the-radar kind of scheme happening where one company might be depositing money to a string of people, and then those people depositing to the party, and then effectively that company, had it done the deposit directly itself, it would have had to do the disclosure. So you get a sense that there might be a network of work that is happening insofar as that is concerned. The reason why thresholds became important in South Africa, and I remember when this legislation was before Parliament, I'd actually made my own submissions, and that the 100,000 rands was a bit high of a threshold in terms of disclosures, because even if you give 50,000 rands to a party, that's still quite a substantive amount that you are giving. Now, the argument that My Vote Counts is that there's nothing scientific about that figure. I doubt there will be anything scientific about any threshold figure, to tell you the truth, because I'm not so sure what gives sway of a funder over a political party. If you receive, for example, 10 million donations from multiple funders, it might be very difficult for any of those funders to actually have sway over your party. But if you only survive on 10 million rands from one funder or from funds from one funder, then that funder might actually have sway over your organization. So I think the issues are quite complex in that at times people fear victimization, that if they are seen to be supporting a political party, a particular political party, then they might be victimized by different interests in society, those who are opposed to the type of political party they so choose. And that's why the threshold is important. However, what is very, very clear, though, Maseko, is that you can, in actual fact, account even for 50 rands. That's how retail stores do it. If you have credit at a retail store where you bought shoes or clothes and you go and pay 50 rands, they immediately have a functionality that is able to pick up that you've paid, and then they put it against your credit and to decrease your credit with that particular chain store. So I do think that there is merit in asking for full disclosures, that even if a person gives 50 rands, they must be disclosed as much as the person who gives 15 million rands, and that is just to solve for transparency. Transparency-wise, that makes absolute sense. Politically, that might not make sense because of the kind of political environment that South Africa finds itself in, which is actually highly tolerant of people who deviate from what is deemed to be the establishment and the center of our politics, if they so fund other organizations that then appear to be threatening the status quo.
And Lukhona, I just spoke to the IEC's executive for political funding, Mr. Mahlang, when he was saying that, of course, if the court rules in favor of my vote counts, it would mean more work for the IEC and trying to make sure that they're able to verify the list of donors that political parties would hand into them. What do you think about that reasoning from the IEC? They say they don't mind, but South Africans must understand that their report will then take much longer to consolidate.
Of course, it would take much longer to consolidate, but they would have to work it probably would invite that they receive bank statements from political parties and not just receive, as you'd know, yesterday they were launching the first annual report on political party funding. So they rely on receiving audited financial statements from registered political parties. And I think then that this would entail them receiving bank statements so that they can actually see the deposits themselves, or it might just need that, I don't know, there's an interface between bank, accounts of political parties and the IEC and so on. But it is a doable thing. It's quite correct that it would add more work. And Maseko, I think you might also be aware that when this legislation, the Political Party Funding Act, was enacted, there was a lot of debate as to whether or not the IEC should be the custodian and administrator of this act. And I think the IEC itself had some sense of misgivings, because remember, the core duty of the IEC is elections management. And if you take your election management body and you let it administer something that could spark so much controversy as to, are political parties truthful in their disclosures?
Them as well.
You could taint the IEC. I think one of the questions that we still need to revisit, as my vote counts through this court case, is effectively opening up a conversation around amendments. And you know that the Minister of Home Affairs himself, Dr. R100K, has sort of indicated the type of reforms or amendments that are needed to the legislation, particularly because the independent candidates are not yet imagined in the Political Party Funding Act, as it were. One of the things I think we still need to talk about is whether or not the IEC is the correct institution that should look after this, particularly insofar as the controversies that may arise in future, where a political party must be sanctioned because maybe it did not disclose, and then that political party could argue that it's a smear campaign. Now, you can't have the IEC being accused of leading smear campaigns and so on. So I'm still not convinced that the administration of this act is well placed with the IEC, given the core mandate of the IEC, even though the IEC has taken on this job because it has been legislated to do so. I think they themselves probably still have some misgivings about playing that role.
Yeah, and I'm compelled to agree with you on that one. But lastly, Lukhona, and very quickly, should we be concerned as South Africans about voting next year? I know that government does have leeway to postpone elections for about 5 to 6 months, so we have until November next year. But should we be concerned? There are challenges against two acts when it comes to our elections, and those acts affect each other. That is the Political Party Funding Act and the Electoral Amendment Bill.
Maseko, the Constitutional Court was very clear in 2021 that it's undesirable for elected public officials or public representatives to remain in office long after their time has, prescribed. So the Constitution is very clear. Elections must be held at the 5th anniversary of the previous elections. Or within 90 days of that. So elections can only be between May and August, unless the National Assembly were to dissolve itself and trigger early elections. But the biggest deadline is August next year, irrespective of what happens with those court cases. And I got sense and headwind that the filing of papers to the Electoral Act Amendment Act will probably be before the end of this month. So definitely a court case is on there. But I do think, Maseko, we shouldn't worry about the postponement of elections. That will not happen. What we should worry about is whether or not they will happen under this new Amendment Act, or they will happen under the old rules,
the old one,
if those who litigate against this Amendment Act succeed. But elections, they will definitely take place in 2024.
All right, Lukhona Vangqa, political analyst and the host of On the Spot with Lukhona Vangqa here on eNCA every Sunday at noon. Thank you very much for your time.